Warning: the following story contains graphic descriptions of violence, mental illness, and murder. The local legends call it Annie's Road. A desolate, winding stretch in Totowa, New Jersey, where the trees seem to whisper secrets and the air is always thick with dread. They say a girl named Annie died here long ago, a prom night gone wrong, an accident turned fatal. But the stories are only half right. They never mention the madness that grips those who walk that road. The blood. The terror. The slasher who still haunts the shadows, but I know. I know because I am the slasher, it's always the same at first. The headlights cutting through the dark, the nervous laughs of the kids who think they're brave enough to face Annie's Road. They don't know I'm watching them, hidden in the woods. Just beyond the reach of their lights. I wait until their courage turns to fear. It's a beautiful thing, fear. It's raw, it's primal. It's the last thing they feel before I tear them apart. My name doesn't matter. It's what I do that defines me. What I've always done, ever since the night I was born again in blood. They think I'm a ghost, a specter of the girl who died, but I'm very much alive. And I'm far worse than any ghost. They come to the road, these kids, to test their bravery. The bullies. The loudmouths. The ones who think they're invincible. I show them just how fragile they are. It starts with paranoia, the rustling of leaves, the snap of a twig, the shadows that move when they shouldn't. They think it's the wind, a deer, or maybe even Annie's spirit. But it's me, creeping closer, feeling the rush as their fear grows. I used to be like them. Weak. Afraid. Bullied until I broke, and when I did, something snapped inside me. I became more than they ever imagined. More than they feared. I became the embodiment of their nightmares. I became what Annie was supposed to be, a reckoning. I remember them. Every single one of them. The way they laughed, the way they tortured me. The names they called me. Freak. Psycho. Monster. They didn't know how right they were. Remember the taste of their blood when I finally snapped. The sound of their screams, but that was only the beginning. Now, I hunt them. The ones like them. The bullies who think they own the world. I make them see the truth. I make them feel what I felt. And I take my time. Oh, how I take my time. The latest group is perfect. High school seniors, full of themselves, daring each other to go further down the road, into the dark. They think they'll see a ghost. Instead, they'll see me. I follow them silently, the thrill building inside me. They've split up, looking for signs of Annie. Idiots. They make it too easy. I pick off the first one with a swift slash to the throat. He doesn't even see it coming. The blood sprays warm and thick, coating my hands. I drag the body into the underbrush. No one will find him until I want them to. The next one hears the rustling, but by then, it's too late. A quick stab to the gut, and she goes down, gasping, her eyes wide with terror. I whisper in her ear as the life drains from her, telling her how she'll be famous now. Part of the legend, the others hear her dying breaths. They start to panic, calling out, but no one answers. They run, but I know this road better than anyone. It's mine. I'm in control. The third one is easy, too scared to think straight, he stumbles right into me. I drive the knife in deep, feeling the resistance as it cuts through muscle and bone. His eyes meet mine, and for a moment, I see myself reflected there. But not the weak, scared kid I once was. No, I see the predator I've become. The last one is always the best. By now, they're so terrified they can barely think. They'll do anything, say anything to survive. But it's not about survival anymore. It's about the lesson. The revenge. I corner the final one, a girl who reminds me of the ones who tormented me back then. She begs, she pleads, but I only smile. There's no mercy here. Not on Annie's road. I take my time with her, savoring every cut, every scream, every tear. As she lies there, bleeding out, I lean in close and tell her the truth. That I'm no ghost. That I'm what happens when you push someone too far. That the real monsters are the ones who create people like me. She looks at me with wide, glassy eyes, the life fading from them, and I feel nothing but satisfaction. Another chapter added to the legend. The news will talk about the murders, the disappearances. They'll blame it on Annie's ghost, the haunted road. But I know the truth. I am the ghost. The killer in the dark. The slasher who stalks Annie's road. They'll keep coming, and I'll keep waiting. It's a cycle, a ritual. And every time I kill, I feel a little more alive. A little more powerful. A little more free, and when the legend grows, when they tell stories of the slasher of Annie's road, they'll remember that this isn't just a ghost story. It's a warning, because I'm still here, waiting. And the road is never truly empty. The bodies weren't discovered until the next morning. The police found them scattered along the road, each one marked with the same brutality. Their throats slit, their chests carved open, their eyes wide in death. The blood had soaked into the earth, turning the dirt and leaves a deep, dark red. The town of Totowa was in shock. But for me, it was just another successful night. I watched from the shadows as the officers swarmed the scene. Their faces pale, their voices hushed. They didn't know what to make of it. Some thought it was a cult, others whispered about Annie's ghost finally seeking revenge. They were all wrong. This was my work. My art. I slipped away unnoticed, the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. I replayed the kills in my mind, savoring every moment. Each one was perfect in its own way. The terror, the pain, the inevitability of their deaths. They never saw it coming, not really. They never understood that once they stepped onto Annie's road, they were already dead. But the high was fleeting. As soon as the sun began to rise, I felt the familiar emptiness creeping back in. The itch that couldn't be scratched. The hunger that couldn't be sated. It was always like this after a kill. The satisfaction never lasted. I needed more. A few days later, the town held a vigil for the dead. Candles, flowers, and tearful faces gathered along Annie's road, as if that could somehow bring them back or keep the next victim safe. They spoke of the victims as if they were saints, but I knew the truth. They were just like the bullies who had tormented me. They got what they deserved. I watched from a distance, hidden in the woods. I could see their fear, the way they glanced nervously into the darkness, wondering if the killer was among them. It was almost funny, how little they knew. They were looking for a monster when it was just a person like any of them. That's the part that scared them the most, I think. The idea that someone like me could be lurking in their midst, hiding in plain sight, but I didn't care about their fears or their prayers. I was already planning my next move. The itch had returned, stronger than before. I needed to feel the rush again, to see the life drain from their eyes. As the crowd began to disperse, I noticed a girl lingering behind, alone. She looked familiar, one of the vigil organizers, maybe. She was holding a candle, staring down the road with a distant, haunted expression. Something about her drew me in. She wasn't like the others. There was a sadness in her, a darkness that mirrored my own. I decided she would be next. Her name was Emily. I found that out easily enough. A quick search on social media, a little digging through local records, and I had everything I needed to know. She lived alone in a small house on the edge of town, worked at a bookstore, and had a penchant for walking down Annie's Road late at night. Perfect. I started watching her, learning her routines. She was careful, always looking over her shoulder, always locking her doors. But no one is ever careful enough. Not when they're dealing with someone like me. I'm patient. I'm thorough. And I'm relentless. I began leaving little signs for her to find. A candle on her doorstep, a note with her name written in blood-red ink, a lock of hair from one of my previous victims. I wanted to see how long it would take for her to break, but she didn't break. She didn't even tell anyone. Instead, she started carrying a knife, kept her lights on at night, and set up cameras around her house. It was almost admirable, the way she tried to protect herself. Almost, but it wouldn't save her. One night, I decided to make my move. She was walking down Annie's Road again, alone, her knife clutched tightly in her hand. I followed her, close enough to hear her breathing, close enough to strike. But I waited. I wanted to see if she'd sense me, if she'd turn around. She didn't. When I finally stepped out of the shadows, she didn't scream. She didn't run. She just stared at me, her eyes wide with something I hadn't expected, recognition. I knew you'd come, she said, her voice steady, though I could see her hands trembling. You're the one who's been killing them, aren't you? The slasher of Annie's Road. I smiled. What gave me away? The way you watch me, she replied. The way you leave those gifts. You're not just a killer. You want to be seen. You want to be known. She was smarter than the others, I'll give her that. But it didn't matter. I lunged at her, my knife flashing in the moonlight. She tried to fight, slashing wildly, but I was faster. I grabbed her wrist, twisted it until the knife fell from her grip, and knocked her to the ground. She struggled, kicked, but I pinned her down easily. The fear was there now, in her eyes, mingling with something else, something like resignation. It almost made me pause, but the itch was too strong, the need too overwhelming. I've been waiting for you, she whispered as I raised the knife, and then I brought it down, hard, into her chest. Her body jerked, and I twisted the blade, savoring the feel of it cutting through flesh and bone. She gasped, blood bubbling up in her throat, but she didn't scream. Not once. As the life drained from her eyes, I leaned in close, my lips brushing her ear. Now you're part of the legend. Emily's body was found the next day, laid out in the center of Annie's Road, her blood soaking into the asphalt. The town was in an uproar, the media swarming like vultures, and the police were baffled. They had no leads, no suspects, just another brutal murder to add to the growing list. But I didn't care. I'd moved on, already planning my next hunt. The thrill of Emily's death was already fading, the emptiness creeping back in. I needed more. I always needed more. As I watched the news reports from my hiding place, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and hunger. Satisfaction that the legend of Annie's Road would continue to grow, fueled by fear and blood. Hunger because I knew that this wouldn't be enough. It was never enough. They'll keep coming, drawn by the stories, the thrill, the danger. And I'll be waiting for them, hidden in the shadows, ready to add another chapter to the bloody legend. Annie's Road isn't haunted by a ghost. It's haunted by me. And I'm not done yet. The town will heal, eventually. They'll try to forget, to move on, but the road will always be there, a dark reminder of the terror that lurks just beyond the light. The legend will grow, the stories will spread, and more fools will come, thinking they're brave enough to face the darkness. But I'll be there, waiting in the shadows, my knife sharp and my hunger endless. Because the legend of Annie's Road isn't just a story. It's a warning, and those who ignore it will pay the price in blood. The media frenzy didn't die down after Emily's murder. If anything, it only intensified. The town of Totowa was thrust into the national spotlight, a small community suddenly infamous for its brutal slasher. The police were under pressure like never before, and the locals lived in fear, knowing that something, was out there, waiting for the next victim. That's when they brought in Detective Laura Hayes. She was a seasoned investigator, known for her cold, methodical approach. Hayes wasn't from Totowa, she'd seen horrors in bigger cities, and she wasn't about to let some small-town legend shake her. The moment she arrived, she took control of the investigation, combing through the case files, studying the crime scenes, and interviewing anyone who might have a clue about the killer. But she wasn't prepared for what she would find on Annie's Road. I watched Detective Hayes from the moment she stepped foot in town. I could tell she was different. Smarter, more experienced than the local cops who were stumbling over themselves trying to catch me. She was careful, precise, like a hunter. But she didn't realize that she was the prey. I decided to play with her. To make her think she was getting closer while I led her deeper into my trap. I started leaving clues, small things that only someone like her would notice. A piece of fabric from one of the victims, a footprint just clear enough to follow. And finally, a note, written in the same blood-red ink I'd used for Emily. The note simply read, "Catch me if you can." I could imagine the look on her face when she found it, the determination mixed with frustration. It thrilled me. For the first time in a long while, I felt a rush that went beyond the kill. This was a game, a deadly game of cat and mouse, and I was going to enjoy every second of it. Detective Hayes wasn't like the others. She didn't panic, didn't make mistakes. She analyzed everything, piecing together my pattern, my methods. She even started to understand the way I thought. It was impressive. Almost too impressive. She tracked me to an abandoned house near Annie's Road, one of my hideouts, where I kept trophies from my kills. The place was a shrine to my work, every detail meticulously preserved. I watched from a distance as she entered the house, moving cautiously, her gun drawn. She was good, but I was better. I knew every inch of that house, every creak in the floorboards, every shadow. I waited until she reached the basement, the heart of my lair, before I struck. The moment she stepped into the room, I cut the power. The lights flickered and died, plunging her into darkness. I heard her sharp intake of breath. The rustle of her clothing as she tensed, waiting for me to make my move, but I didn't move. Not at first. I wanted her to feel the fear, the same fear I'd instilled in all my victims. The terror of knowing you're not alone, that something is watching, waiting, ready to pounce. I let the silence stretch, let her mind fill with possibilities. Then, I struck. I moved through the darkness with practiced ease, silent as a shadow. She didn't hear me until it was too late. I was behind her, my knife flashing as I slashed at her arm, drawing blood. She spun around, firing blindly, but I was already gone, melted back into the shadows. "Show yourself," she shouted, her voice steady despite the pain. She was trying to provoke me, to make me angry. It almost worked. I circled her, the thrill building inside me. This was what I lived for, the hunt, the fear, the moment of death. I struck again, this time cutting across her thigh. She stumbled, cursing, but she didn't go down. She was strong. Stronger than I'd expected, but not strong enough. I came at her head-on, our bodies colliding in a struggle for control. She was faster than I anticipated, and for a moment, I felt the cold barrel of her gun pressed against my chest. But then, I twisted her arm, forcing her to drop the weapon. It clattered to the floor, and I kicked it away. We grappled in the dark, our breaths ragged, our bodies slick with sweat and blood. She fought with everything she had, but I could feel her weakening, her strength fading as I tightened my grip around her throat. "This is the end, detective," I whispered, my voice barely audible over her labored breathing. "You came close, but close isn't good enough." Her eyes locked onto mine, defiant even in the face of death. I almost admired her for it. Almost. With a final, brutal twist, I drove the knife deep into her side. She gasped, the air leaving her lungs in a rush, her body going limp in my arms. I held her there for a moment, feeling the life drain from her. Before letting her fall to the floor, as I stood over her, the adrenaline slowly ebbed away, leaving only the familiar emptiness. The itch was gone, for now, but I knew it would return. It always did. The death of Detective Hayes sent shockwaves through Totowa. The police were devastated, their best hope of catching me gone, their morale shattered. The media went into a frenzy, declaring that the slasher of Annie's Road had claimed another victim, this time, a hero, but the truth was, I wasn't done yet. Not even close. I returned to Annie's Road, my hunting ground, the place where I felt most alive. The legend had grown, the stories more lurid, more terrifying. They spoke of a killer who couldn't be stopped. A monster who stalked the darkness, feeding on fear and blood. I liked that. It was close to the truth, but as I stood on the road, the wind rustling through the trees, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, a flicker of doubt. Killing Hayes had been a thrill, but it had also been risky. Too risky. I had left traces, clues that the police could follow. They might not be as smart as Hayes, but they were determined, desperate even, and then there was the other feeling. The one I couldn't quite name. It gnawed at me, a whisper in the back of my mind, telling me that this game was far from over. That something was coming for me. But what? Another detective? A vigilante? Or was it just my own paranoia, the madness that had driven me this far finally catching up to me? I shook it off, focusing on the task at hand. I needed another kill, something to distract me from the doubts, to remind me of who I was. The slasher of Annie's Road. The legend. The monster, but as I moved through the darkness, hunting for my next victim, I couldn't shake the feeling that the hunter was about to become the hunted. The night was quiet, too quiet. I had chosen my next target, a young couple, foolishly daring each other to walk down Annie's Road at midnight. They were easy prey, oblivious to the danger lurking just beyond the reach of their flashlights. I followed them silently, the knife in my hand ready to strike. But as I moved closer, something caught my attention, a sound, faint but distinct. Footsteps. But not theirs. Someone else was out there, moving through the darkness. Watching. Waiting. I froze, scanning the trees, the shadows, looking for the source of the noise. And then I saw him. He was standing just off the road, partially hidden by the trees. A tall figure, dressed in dark clothing, a mask obscuring his face. He was holding something, a weapon, long and gleaming in the moonlight. For a moment, we just stood there, staring at each other. The couple, oblivious to the tension in the air, continued down the road, laughing, unaware of the two predators watching them. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. This wasn't a cop, not another detective. This was something else. Someone who was like me, a slasher. He stepped forward, his eyes locking onto mine, and I knew then that this wasn't just a coincidence. He had come for me. He was challenging me. The realization sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. This was it, the ultimate test, the final confrontation. A battle between two monsters, each one determined to be the last one standing. I didn't hesitate. I lunged at him, knife raised, but he was ready. He dodged my attack with a speed that caught me off guard, and before I could react, he slashed at me with his own blade, cutting deep into my arm. Pain flared, but I pushed through it, attacking again, my movements fueled by desperation and rage. We clashed in the middle of the road, two shadows locked in a deadly dance, the moonlight glinting off our blades. He was good, better than I expected. Every move I made, he countered, every strike I attempted, he blocked. It was like fighting a mirror image of myself, someone who knew all my tricks, all my weaknesses. But I wasn't going to let him win. I couldn't. This was my road, my legend, and I wasn't about to let some copycat take it from me. With a roar of fury, I drove my knife toward his chest, but he twisted out of the way with a grace that defied his size. The momentum carried me forward, and I stumbled, just barely catching myself before crashing to the ground. He didn't wait for me to recover. I felt a sharp pain in my side as his blade sliced through my flesh, the warmth of blood quickly soaking my clothes. I hissed in pain, spinning around to face him, my vision blurring from the intensity of the struggle, but he was relentless. His movements were precise, calculated, as if he knew every weakness, every vulnerability in my technique. I had never faced anyone like him before, and it infuriated me. This was supposed to be my domain, my hunting ground, and yet here I was, being pushed to the brink by a stranger in the shadows. You think you can take this from me? I spat, blood flecking my lips as I lunged at him again. This road belongs to me. Our blades clashed, the sound of steel ringing out in the silent night. We were locked in a deadly dance, neither willing to give an inch. The air was thick with tension, the scent of blood heavy, as we fought for control, not just of the road, but of the legend itself. For every strike I landed, he matched it with one of his own. We were equals in the worst possible way, two sides of the same coin, both fueled by the same darkness, the same hunger for violence and domination. But that only made me want to destroy him even more. He feinted to the left, and I took the bait, swinging wide, but he ducked under my arm and drove his blade into my side again. This time, the pain was excruciating, and I stumbled, my vision going black at the edges, but I couldn't stop. I wouldn't stop. If I went down, it would be fighting. It would be with his blood on my hands. With a guttural scream, I lashed out, catching him off guard. My knife found purchase, cutting deep into his shoulder. He grunted in pain, stumbling back, but I didn't let up. I pressed the attack, slashing wildly, my desperation fueling every movement. He was on the defensive now, but I could see the same determination in his eyes that I felt burning in my chest. He wasn't going to go down easily, and that only made me more vicious. We were both bleeding, both battered, but neither of us willing to back down. This was more than just a fight. This was a battle for survival, for supremacy. The road wasn't big enough for the both of us. Only one of us would walk away from this, and it had to be me. It had to be. The battle raged on, each of us growing more frantic as the minutes passed. Our movements became more erratic, more desperate, the pain and exhaustion taking their toll. The blood loss was slowing me down, my vision blurring with every breath, but I couldn't stop. Not now. I had him on the ropes, or so I thought. He was slowing down, his movements less precise, and I saw my opportunity. I lunged at him with everything I had, putting all my strength into one final, brutal strike, but it was a mistake. He sidestepped at the last second, and before I could recover, he brought his blade down, slicing deep into my back. The pain was blinding, and I fell to my knees, my body finally betraying me. I could feel the warmth of my own blood pooling around me, soaking into the ground. The world was spinning, the trees and the road blurring together in a haze of pain and darkness. But as I lay there, gasping for breath, I saw him standing over me, his knife dripping with my blood. He was breathing heavily, his own wound severe, but there was something in his eyes that I recognized. Something that terrified me. He wasn't going to kill me. Not yet. he crouched down, his face inches from mine, and for the first time, I could see past the mask. His eyes were cold, calculating, but there was a glint of satisfaction there, a hint of triumph that sent a chill down my spine. "You're good," he said, his voice low and raspy. "But not good enough." I tried to speak, to curse him, to demand answers, but my voice wouldn't come. All I could do was watch as he stood up, towering over me, his shadow long and menacing in the moonlight. "This road isn't yours anymore," he said quietly, almost to himself. "It never was." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving me bleeding and broken on the cold, hard asphalt. I tried to move, to drag myself after him, but my body refused to obey. All I could do was lie there, helpless, as the darkness closed in around me. I woke up hours later, or maybe it was days. The pain was overwhelming, my body battered and broken. But somehow, I was still alive. Barely, the road was silent, the trees whispering in the wind. My blood had stained the ground, marking the spot where I had fallen, but the slasher was gone. The bastard had left me to die, but he hadn't finished the job. And that was his mistake, I wasn't dead. Not yet. Slowly, painfully, I dragged myself to my feet. Every movement was agony, but I forced myself to stand, to stay upright. The world was spinning, the road swaying beneath my feet, but I didn't care. I couldn't care, and I fell to my knees, my body finally betraying me. I could feel the warmth of my own blood pooling around me, soaking into the ground. The world was spinning, the trees and the road blurring together in a haze of pain and darkness. But as I lay there, gasping for breath, I saw him standing over me, his knife dripping with my blood. He was breathing heavily, his own wound severe, but there was something in his eyes that I recognized, something that terrified me. He wasn't going to kill me. Not yet. He crouched down, his face inches from mine, and for the first time, I could see past the mask. His eyes were cold, calculating, but there was a glint of satisfaction there, a hint of triumph that sent a chill down my spine. "You're good," he said, his voice low and raspy. "But not good enough." I tried to speak, to curse him, to demand answers, but my voice wouldn't come. All I could do was watch as he stood up, towering over me, his shadow long and menacing in the moonlight. "This road isn't yours anymore," he said quietly, almost to himself. "It never was." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving me bleeding and broken on the cold, hard asphalt. I tried to move, to drag myself after him, but my body refused to obey. All I could do was lie there, helpless, as the darkness closed in around me. I woke up hours later, or maybe it was days. The pain was overwhelming, my body battered and broken. But somehow, I was still alive. Barely. The road was silent, the trees whispering in the wind. My blood had stained the ground, marking the spot where I had fallen, but the slasher was gone. The bastard had left me to die, but he hadn't finished the job. And that was his mistake, I wasn't dead. Not yet. Slowly, painfully, I dragged myself to my feet. Every movement was agony, but I forced myself to stand, to stay upright. The world was spinning, the road swaying beneath my feet, but I didn't care. I couldn't care, because on Annie's road, the only certainty was death. And the only question was who would be next. As I vanished into the night, the blood-soaked road stretched on behind me, long and unforgiving, a silent witness to the horrors yet to come, and somewhere, out there in the shadows, the slasher waited, his blade sharp, his hunger endless. The legend would grow. The killings would continue, the road would never be empty.